Okay, so welcome anyway. So the thought behind this meeting started about a year ago when we were thinking in Roche how to best contribute to and benefit from the really considerable strengths in and around London, Oxford, Cambridge. And we thought of UCL as a global leader in many of the areas, in fact, all of the areas in which Roche has a particular interest. So neuroscience, inflammation, immunology, ophthalmology, infection, and oncology. So we're very excited that Roche is participating in this meeting led by UCL today. Clearly, geography dictates how well a collaboration may work, and that works very well for us. We're only 20 minutes up the line in Welwyn Garden City, and it's really possible to collaborate effectively across those sorts of ranges. So working with Tamarin Lashley and Daniel Hockhauser and Anna de Faro Souza at UCL, we've been thinking about what sort of collaborations we want, and we want the emphases to be on openness, breadth. UCL is obviously an academic institution with enormous breadth, and ultimately that what we are working on has applications for patient benefit. During this meeting, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions. So if you hover the cursor over the screen, you'll see a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, so you can ask questions through that. We've also collected the information you kindly put in your registration form, so we do have a good idea of the main issues that you want addressed in this meeting, and we'll do our very best to address them. So on the next slide, I want just to address what are the things we're trying to achieve in this meeting. Well, the first thing is that we want to have a better understanding of each other's interests and perspectives. And we've got a great list of speakers today, which will help you see that. We want to identify or begin to identify areas of mutual interest, which could be the foundation of future collaborations. And we want to lay the basis for such future collaborations. You're going to hear from Tamarin Lashley at the Institute of Neurology about a suggested consortium model where there would be an academic industrial consortium, which may be, it's sort of free text, if you like, but there is a suite of opportunities which Roche can offer, which could be building blocks for those consortia. We'll also give you points of contact so that after this meeting is over and you've had time to reflect on it, we would love to be in planning mode for future collaborations, and we will plan future meetings which could be small or bespoke or large, depending on the purpose that they're trying to serve. I was asked on the next slide just to say a little bit about myself. So I actually started at my medical life at the Middlesex Hospital, as was now part of UCL, and completed my medical training in London, Cambridge, and Canterbury. And it was actually whilst I was at the Middlesex, I did an intercalated BSc, and it was in cell pathology, and I became absolutely fascinated by the problems of cancer. And I went on to do a PhD at the Marie Curie Research Institute in melanocyte-specific gene expression. It was also at that time that I had my first brush with charities. My father's family came from Yugoslavia, which was war-torn at that time. And we ultimately ended up building a rehabilitation unit for war-damaged children. After my PhD, I did my medical oncology training at the Marsden, and for much of my life, actually, the gentleman you can see in front of Buckingham Palace, Martin Gore, was my mentor, as he was for several other people on this call, in fact, a very large figure who sadly died not so long ago. But he was an instrumental figure in the benefits of working effectively across sectors, and he was very good at that. I took my first senior lecture job here at UCL and the North Middlesex Hospital, and I developed my interests in melanoma and lung cancer, particularly genetic predisposition to lung cancer, and kidney cancer. And I focused increasingly on kidney cancer as time went on. And I also became involved with Macmillan Cancer Research, Cancer Support rather, which is a big organization, a big charity in this country, which is extremely important to people who are affected by cancer, be they the patient themselves or their friends or family. I had a further stint at the Marsden as a senior lecturer for 5 years, and then took a chair in medical oncology at Cambridge, from where I have really developed my interest in identifying, recruiting, developing, and either placing or retaining talented people. And that's a major interest of mine, both in academia and in industry. AZ moved its biomedical research campus in the UK to Cambridge, and I saw that as potentially game-changing for us in Cambridge. So I'm now on long-term leave of absence and have been since 2014. So I do a clinic, but nothing else in the university. And I initially led the early oncology clinical team for 5 years at AZ, and learned a great deal during that period, but ultimately wanted to come back to genitourinary oncology, where I lead the team in Roche, which delivers and designs late phase clinical trials in prostate, bladder, and kidney cancers. So on the next slide, if I've worked in these 3 areas, why is it so difficult, since we're all trying ultimately to achieve patient benefit? And I think the main point really for my whole talk is that it's really important for us all to understand the perspectives, drivers, and expectations that each of the potential partners, be they university, hospital, or pharmaceutical company, what are their respective drivers. So I would strongly advise everyone, including myself, to understand your collaborators before you seek to influence them. A couple of examples. So in university life, resource is often limiting, time is less often limiting. But the exact opposite is true in certainly large pharmaceutical companies, where $1 million may be a relatively small amount of money, but actually a month is a very long time and can be a real deal breaker. So these are fundamentally different ways of thinking. Similarly, university and pharma have the same view about peaks of excellence. We're really interested in peaks of excellence and not being mediocre at things. In the clinic, you can't be weak at anything. So a hospital like UCH has to have strength across the board. And although it's great to have peaks of excellence, you can't have any areas of ultimate weakness. And that is true of a number of institutions, but it's particularly true of hospitals. So these are different considerations in running these sorts of organizations, and therefore the work they do. Another fundamental difference is that I think in university and clinic, we like to explore every opportunity fully before deciding whether or not it's going to be of benefit to patients. In the pharmaceutical world, we don't have either the ability or possibly the willingness to do that. We want to identify areas that are going to have a high chance of technical success and be of patient benefit as early as possible, and focus resources on them. And that means defocusing or killing areas that are less likely, that have a very low probability of technical success or will not add value to the patient's treatment paradigm. So it's these fundamentally different ways of thinking that we need to understand. It doesn't mean that we can't work together, but it does mean that it's helpful to understand where the other parties are coming from. And on my last slide, I would just like to show that there are many criteria that any company would use for an academic collaboration. And I know that academic and clinical colleagues will have their own criteria for what they want from a potential collaboration with a company. So I've deliberately stuck to the company view of this, although I'm happy to speak about the opposite side as well. But I would like to point out 2 things. First of all, the scientific leadership and what the expectations are have changed over time. So it's no longer the case that companies are even compliant, actually, in providing money for a meeting and sending a couple of people to a meeting and that's the end of their engagement. That is really borderline compliant nowadays, and it's certainly scientifically unsatisfying. So the idea of a shared level of scientific leadership is important to companies, and I think will provide much more value to any collaboration as well. And the second thing is that clear and frequent communication is enormously helpful to a successful collaboration. So it's in that spirit that I'm very happy to hand over to Ed Wild to lead off a really excellent panel of speakers to address these issues with us all today. Thank you. Ed.
Thank you. Hi, I hope everyone can hear me. So I need to start with a couple of disclaimers. The first is that I'm certainly by my title here not claiming to be a genius or anything like it, but it was a quote that I found that I quite liked. Second, my background is medical. I'm a consultant neurologist as well as a Huntington's disease researcher at the Institute of Neurology. So, and I think it's reasonable to assume that gives one an advantage when it comes to making connections with pharmaceutical companies whose aim is helping patients. Because I think clinician scientists like me who do research involving patients are more likely to be able to present an easy case that one's work is likely to be something that might be beneficial to the formation of an industry academic collaboration. However, hopefully, simply by sharing my experience of working with Roche, and I happen to have worked with Roche. This isn't an advert. If I'd worked with Novartis, I'd be happy to talk about that. I've worked with Roche among many others, but my most substantial industry collaboration has been with Roche and its partners. Anyway, the quote is from Sir Joshua Reynolds. I'm not sure I agree with the second bit, unless you use industry to mean hard work, which I think he did. Okay, so let's go to the next slide and back in time to 2005. I know, but first a word about silos. Can we go back one slide? I just want to self-indulgently mention the fact that the silos aren't inherently bad. That they are large, they contain something useful, and in the allegorical sense, they contain a body of expertise, which is valuable in and of itself as a resource. And having it in a silo, such as a university, provides a means of containing it and looking after it and knowing where it is. But a silo that isn't connected to anything isn't much use to anyone. And so I think silos are good, but perhaps instead of breaking them, we should be joining them. Next slide, please. So back in time to 2005, slightly different looking Ed starts his PhD fellowship with Sarah Tabrizi at the Institute of Neurology looking for biomarkers for Huntington's disease. And by coincidence, in the same year, the first report of a Huntington lowering success in an HD mouse using a targeted oligonucleotide therapy came out in PNAS. Next slide, please. And so 8 years later, lots of water under the bridge for me, not so much for Roche, which has been around a lot longer. ISIS Pharmaceuticals, which is the leader in the early stage development of antisense drugs, announced that it had formed a partnership with Roche to test Huntington lowering therapeutics in HD patients. And as a biomarker person who had published a few papers by then, I and alongside Sarah Tabrizi were both brought on board in an advisory capacity to the Roche preclinical and translational team that was leading the development of that program. Actually, we were consultants via UCL consultants to ISIS Pharmaceuticals, but the Roche team was involved from the early days. Okay, next, please. So then a couple of years later, 2015 was a big year. It was the first year of my clinician scientist fellowship funded by the MRC and the start of the HD CSF biomarker study, which I've led. In the same year, we published the assay, the mutant Huntington assay, which was the first time that we could quantify mutant Huntington in cerebrospinal fluid, which ended up, of course, being important for the start of trials to lower Huntington in the nervous system. In September of that year, I gave the first dose of this drug HTTRX to a Huntington's disease patient. And by coincidence, in the same year, for reasons that no one fully understands, ISIS changed its name to Ionis Pharmaceuticals. Next slide, please. Time elapsed, and the end of 2017 brought excellent news. We showed that we could lower Huntington in a dose-dependent manner, and this was an academic industry collaborative success, and the first real therapeutic success, at least numerically, for Huntington's disease. And of course, by that time the announcement was made, preparation was already well underway, using our advisory services via UCLC, now directly to Roche, for creating a phase 3 trial, which launched shortly after. Next slide, please. So the paper came out and with the results of that work, and the phase 3 trial began. The recruitment was very rapid. The trial was expanded, and it was one of the biggest trials we've ever run in Huntington's disease, and it was all going very well. And as a result, we worked very closely with Roche for the next few years to expand the program and see what our ongoing research could do to empower the program. And essentially, through my HD-CSF study, which was funded by the MRC, we expanded that to create the Digital HD study, which is a study of digital smartphone and smartwatch monitoring technology. And Hoffmann La Roche funded the Digital HD as an academic study, but it was based on and complementary to the ongoing HD-CSF study. So that was a real kind of hand-in-hand academic industry partnership. And it took a lot of negotiating between the institutions, but we did get there in plenty of time to make it happen. At the same time, I was appointed chief investigator of the GenPeak study, which was a PK/PD add-on to the phase 3 trial program. And next slide, please. So, and there's an example of the two-way collaboration here. The two baseline and follow-up papers in 2019 and 2020 from the HD-CSF study were substantially improved by the involvement of the core Roche team. This was not an industry study, but by sharing the data with Roche, in accordance with patient and MRC guidelines, we were able to take advantage of Roche's huge bioinformatics team, but also their forward-looking expertise. They knew what they wanted from a biomarker study, and what they wanted was what the regulators and the future patients would want, which is things like sample size calculations for biomarker-empowered trials in HD. And with their expertise, we were able to get substantially greater value than we would have done as a pure academic team. Next slide, please. I think the next slide is just the follow-up paper, which had much the same construct. There's several industry authors on that paper, as well as my team and collaborators. Next, please. Nearly there. So then this is where the story takes a turn towards the sad. Unfortunately, earlier this year, it turned out that the trial was not heading in the direction we were hoping, and it had to be halted. But nonetheless, because we all have so much invested as academics and as industry people, we are all committed to fully mining the data to find out what went wrong and to see whether there is a path forward for the drug, perhaps in a different dose or in a different cohort. And the thing about having formed these very human relationships over nearly 10 years is that you do develop a trust that goes beyond the financial bottom line. And we know as long-standing collaborators that we will all do the right thing by the patients in this situation. Next slide, please. So what have I learned? I think I've come a long way. I'm still an academic principally, but I've come a long way in terms of understanding the industry language around drug development and regulatory matters, the industry mindset. There's sometimes a rather bizarre decision-making framework where the science is in the hands of one group of people, but then the decisions about spending money may be 3 or 4 levels above by people who aren't really at all familiar with the disease that you're dealing with. And that's just something that we have to learn to navigate. But having said that, once a decision is made, the speed with which it's enacted can be quite breathtaking. And the amount of resources that suddenly come to bear, hundreds of people I'd never met before, suddenly we're offering to help with the Huntington's disease research program, and anything they could do to support the trial. And that will end up trickling through to patient benefit, whether the drug is licensed or not. What patients need and what industry wants to get from data are basically, generally speaking, the same thing. In other words, industry wants to get the drugs licensed, and your industry partners will tell you what they need from your data, probably tell you how to get there. Having said that, and I'm not referring to Roche here, I have worked with industry partners who can be very fickle, and it's a sunlight that can shine very brightly, but it can also be taken away very quickly. And this is why I come on to the points at the bottom about promiscuity. I have to say, and with all due respect to industry investors, smaller biotech companies that rely on venture capital, the people investing often have their radars pointing in multiple directions and don't always fully understand the science to the extent that one might think necessary to make big money decisions. So don't be surprised if you find investors misunderstanding or making decisions that you wouldn't agree with when it comes to industry money. In my experience, having industry partners has hugely supported and enhanced my academic outputs and my overall utility to my patients. But what I would say is, do be promiscuous. Especially in a rare disease field like Huntington's disease. When I first started, there were no big pharmaceutical companies, and now there are probably a dozen involved. And I think we owe it to our patients to help them all, even if that has, the potential effect of weakening our relationships with one partner who doesn't want us to work with their competitors. Nonetheless, I do think that we should, because our patients need it, and these are difficult problems that we're trying to solve. Having said that, I think monogamy, i.e. a commitment to one company, so that you are inextricably linked in people's eyes with that company, may not be a good thing. So I think promiscuity is the best thing in this context, but celibacy may be better than monogamy. But that's for you to decide. And so finally, echoing what Tim has said, academia is very slow and cautious, but does get there. UCL business I've found helpful when it comes to protecting and exploiting IP. The most useful partners I have had in this exercise have been UCL consultants, who have really empowered my ability to advise multiple industry partners and make sure that that's done in the proper legal and financial framework that works for everyone. And the translational research office have helped me to navigate a number of very difficult situations where it was very difficult to get the pieces to align. And research services are necessary and can help to reenact contracts. That's my experience. You'll probably find the Q&A more helpful. So a few words of advice. If you do work that is relevant for clinical benefit, you're more likely to be able to form these partnerships. But I think the dissemination and making obvious what the connection is between your work and their clinical mission is the difficult bit, and is something to practice. Talk to industry people, reach out to them actively. There are probably hundreds of posters on basic science at every meeting, and so you need to sort of strategically identify the people to talk to, give them what they need, and they will give you what you need. And I'll stop there because I'll probably go over time. But the one final thing I would say is do help other people. Throw down a rope ladder to help other people and make the connections. Don't guard them like a dragon on a treasure hoard. And UCL will help you to protect your right to publish in case things don't end up the way you want them to if the industry partner withdraws. It's important to have a clause protecting your right to publish as an academic in the event that a partnership stalls, but there's publishable data there. Okay, I'll leave it there. Thanks very much.
Right, many thanks, Ed. We'll move over to Gennaro Pagano, who is the Expert Medical Director at Roche. Over to you, Gennaro.
Perfect, thank you. I'm gonna share my slides. Just one second. So can you see my screen? Yes?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so thank you very much. I think it's a great opportunity. My presentation is slightly different. I will tell you a bit more about Roche Neuroscience rather than myself, and then how we could collaborate in specifically for the Roche early development in neuroscience. So I am also coming from academia. I used to be at King's College before joining Roche. And before that, I worked at MRC, at Imperial College, so everywhere but at UCL. And I really enjoyed the research dynamics and environment that was described by both Tim and Ed in UK. It's really great atmosphere. And one of the main reasons I decided to leave academia to join Roche permanently, right, as a full-time employee, is because the excitement around the commitment that Roche has in neuroscience and the history of Roche in this area were really strong factors, and also the opportunity to really try to do something for millions of patients, right? Rather than go in the clinic, as I was working as a consultant, with individual patients, trying to do something for more patients. And these are my disclosure. I have a very short video to give a overview how Roche see all the development from the value chain. So I'll give it in a sec.
Everything we do at Roche begins with the patients. Starting from an unmet medical need, we work towards providing a new treatment that will meet it. What happens in between is a long and complex journey. The first step of this journey is to understand the disease. Only when we know which molecular processes we need to address in order to treat a disease can we start to design molecules that influence these processes. After designing and synthesizing new and promising molecules, we experimentally validate and test them. Once they've proven themselves in the lab, we go on to take one molecule to clinical studies on humans. First, we work with healthy volunteers to determine the molecule's safety and optimal dose. Next, we verify efficacy and tolerability in actual patients. The data obtained is used to optimize the medicine further and to decide whether the test results are promising enough to take it on into the next resource-intensive phase of the trials. Involving up to thousands of patients, these trials deliver the necessary information to confirm to health authorities that the new medicine is not only consistently safe, but also works better than the currently available treatments. The complete process from an unmet medical need to the approval of a new medicine can often take up to 10 years or more. During this entire time, our various functions work closely together. Here, in more detail, is what they do.
And all these areas that I show, research, clinical development, technical development, are all areas in which it's possible to collaborate with external partners, in particular with academia. And actually, this is the long history of Roche, having people moving from academia through the company. And this started very long ago. So this is the photo of Leo Sternbach, that is leading to the introduction of the benzodiazepine that was developed at Roche in the 60s, and is outside the Nuclei office. And this is a remarkable history that is based on science. Everything was done in the last 125 years, so it's pretty long that Roche is committed to neuroscience, was based mostly on science. And then more recently, the work from another colleague of mine called Hassan Ratni, that contribute to the definition of the risdiplam, that is Evrysdi, that is one of the last drugs that we launched in SMA. So in a few words, the history of Roche and in neuroscience started in the 60s with the benzodiazepine, and then there were drugs developed here at Roche in Basel or in US at Genentech, working on Parkinson, stroke, multiple sclerosis, and SMA. And this is only what in the last years, what we are doing now, and we hope that this will develop transformational therapy in the next decades, are on many areas, from multiple sclerosis to neurodevelopmental. I mostly work on neurodegeneration, and I was leading the prasinezumab team through the phase 2 together with other colleagues, and this was co-development with another company called Proteina. And then Ed was showing about tominersen, right? That also had a strong collaboration with UCL. And all these drug development in different modalities are always done either with the external business partner, but also with close contact with the academic groups. So just to give you some idea about Roche and opportunities, how to collaborate, where I sit in Roche early development, that is in the research and development unit that is here in Switzerland. I'm in Basel. We have another big research unit that is in San Francisco, that is what used to be Genentech, now it's called GRED, that is from the merging of the two companies. And then we have another big research unit in Japan that is under Chugai. We are all part of the big Roche group that has two areas. One is pharmaceutical, where we sit, and you also have another part that is diagnostic, that is trying to develop a tool to either to be used in the clinical practice, but also to facilitate development of our drugs. And then all the research and development activity up to phase 2 converge in one big late stage development that is across different countries including UK, Switzerland, and US. And then we have, of course, the approved product that is after, and then there is the individual affiliates, Roche individual country as also possible to collaborate. So probably what is important for me, the reason why I show this slide is that the majority of the industry contact that you had probably over the last years, and I had before when I was in academia, was with the country level focus, right? With the people with the launch drug. But there are colleagues, medical directors and scientists in late stage and also in early development, where we have many, many preclinical activities with the opportunity for people to join Roche in different capacity. And these are the department that we have in early development, research, early development, where I sit, biomarkers, portfolio operation, and other function. And then these are the disease area we're working on. And currently I'm leading a medical director fellowship program that I created a couple of years ago with the goal to facilitate this transition from industry, from academia to industry. And there is no, what I want to share with the fellow that I had is not one way go, but it's actually possible to come back. I had one fellow that decided to stay at Roche and now work in the late stage organization, so move from early to late. Another one from UCSF in US decided to go back in academia as associate professor, and I have one now that was at UCL before and now is working at Roche for 2 years. And the aim of this program is actually learn how to develop drugs from the industry perspective in order for us either to have a strong medical director that understand academia well and also industry, or eventually go back and be a great PI, a great professor in academia. We also have other programs. I don't have this year, but they are in research and for PhD students. Thank you.
Many thanks, Gennaro. Can I just remind people to use the Q&A function if you do have any questions that we can respond to in the Q&A session. Otherwise, I'll hand over to Tariq Enva, who's Professor of Stem Cell Biology at UCL and also co-director of the CRUK UCL Centre. Over to you, Tariq.
Thank you very much. So I'm also lead for Cancer Research UK City of London Centre, which embraces Crick, King's, Barts and UCL. I just wanted to sort of use this time to basically introduce you to the Cancer Institute, so colleagues at Roche have an understanding of what we look like in terms of shape and size, what our philosophy is and what our primary academic and medical interests are. So we're a slightly different proposition from the average cancer institute, which I think historically has been a specialized institute linked to a specialist cancer hospital, which of course is a very powerful formula. But I think in the sort of modern era, UCL's approach to take the multidisciplinary strengths of essentially, I think now the world's number 8 ranked university in the world, through the portal of the Cancer Institute, to take that knowledge and spread it out through our specialist hospitals out to the broader population encompassed by UCL partners and impact a population of greater than 8 million, who are actually, I think, probably the most genetically diverse population on the planet. So we're really about an ecosystem that is sort of really global in its aspirations. So that formula, I think, has been reasonably successful, and this sort of little infographic on the right shows you that at the moment, based on our publication outputs, we're now the most impactful, indeed scientifically strongest cancer centre in the United Kingdom. And that actually extends beyond the UK. We are now actually stronger, at least by this metric, than all our competitor institutions in Europe. So if I get the next slide, please. So in terms of the way we think about cancer, our approach, as Charlie may allude to later, is very much based on an evolutionary perspective, and understanding that cancer is actually a complex entity, and it's really a matrix of genetic and indeed epigenetic heterogeneity, which in concert with the tumor microenvironment and the complexity that it's encoded therein, evolves through space and time within those niches providing a variegated substrate for selection that is imposed by therapy. And I think this is very important when one considers therapeutic intervention, and it emphasizes the need for both systemic and small molecule based therapies, but also biological therapies as well. So next slide, please. So in terms of tumor specific programs, Tim did very nicely discuss the sort of tensions between peaks of excellence and sort of, breadth of service. We have specialized in particular tumor types in terms of sort of flagship activities. That doesn't mean that we ignore other tumor types or capture those entities within platform-based technologies, which I'll refer to in a minute. A prime focus for us has been hemato-oncology, where currently I think the largest translational activity in Europe, and our hem-onc department has sort of spearheaded our immune-based therapy programs. We are heavily invested in lung cancer with the CRUK Centre of Excellence led by Charlie Swanton, and this has driven much of our work on tumor evolution and tumor heterogeneity and treatment resistance. We have a CRUK Centre of Excellence in brain, which is an emerging area for us. It's focused on stem cells, on niche and tumor microenvironment, developing much needed preclinical models in a disease which is almost universally fatal and in which there's real clinical need. In prostate, you may be aware of Mark Emberton's work, where we've redefined the diagnostic pathway, and we now have a very strong program in treatment resistance. Our focus on gynae-oncology has been predominantly trials-based, and our work on sarcoma has really been around sarcoma genetics and the development of digital pathology. And we have a strong program in GI and hepatobiliary work, focusing on biology, targeted therapy, trials, and more recently, radiation. So next slide, please. But despite the sort of specifics of any one tumor type, and you will have noticed actually that breast cancer was absent from that list, our approach is largely sort of platform-based, with a huge effort in biological therapy. We're currently European leaders in CAR T-cell work, with more than 11 trials open based on novel science that has come out of the UCL Cancer Institute. We're heavily invested in checkpoint blockade, having recently identified a new checkpoint blockade inhibitor, tumor infiltrating lymphocytes, which have led to a spin-out company, BITES, and vaccines. And again, we very much use the strength of our university and its multidisciplinarity to launch programs in early detection, including ACE. You'll be aware of the Summit trials which have gone ahead, the early detection using MRI for prostate cancer, and Gerd Hattar's work in circulating tumor DNA. Radiation, with the advent of our new proton beam center, is an increasing interest for us, particularly the interaction between radiation and immunity and how that might be affected by systemic therapy. A new program for us actually is really around pre-disease biology, really taking early detection to its ultimate limits, which is to understand disease as it initiates, with the opportunities that may bring for cancer interception. We're obviously very strong in trials with the CRUK trials unit, a real emphasis on phase 1 and ATIMPs, as well as conducting sort of landmark observational trials such as TRACERx. We've always been very much of the opinion that enterprise and commercialization is essential to actually take our science to its rightful impact in patients, and we've launched a number of spin-out companies with that particular goal in mind. Next slide. And I'll just end with this, with a general sort of listing perhaps of our research priorities. So, translating genetic understanding of cancer into better treatment, innovating cancer immunotherapy, revolutionizing early diagnosis of cancer and relapse, and looking at progression. There's area of cancer interception, looking at pre-disease biology and early evolution, integrating radiotherapy into precision oncology, and of course, continuing to work hard on early phase clinical trials. So with that, I'll stop. Thank you.
Many thanks, Tariq. I'll now hand over to Dr. Adam Knott, who's Principal Clinical Development Scientist at Roche.
That's great, thank you. And good morning, everyone. It's great to be here and speaking with you on behalf of the oncology group in Roche. And on that note, I'd like to thank Tim, Anna, and the organisers for inviting me to do so. So yeah, my name is Adam Knott. As mentioned, I'm a principal clinical scientist at Roche, where I've been at Roche for, excuse me, just over 12 years now, where my home has been in what we call the HER2 franchise, where my primary focus has been around looking into tumours that are driven by overexpression of HER2. I've been in industry for coming up for 20 years now. I went into industry having completed my PhD and postdoc at Imperial College in London. But I have, in my time at Roche, been involved in a number of academic industry collaborations. And I think, this, maybe we'll get to that in the Q&A section, but there's been some really good learnings to take from those to maybe help with the possibilities for future collaborations between Roche and UCL as we move forward. So over the next 10 minutes or so, I just want to give you a bit of a flavour for our efforts and focus areas within oncology, thinking about some of the key themes and evolving landscape and what we're trying to do to address some of those, and therefore hopefully identifying some opportunities where we can collaborate and build on advancing standard of care and bringing new therapies and improving care for cancer patients in general. So within the organization, these are some of our key themes and key trends that we're looking at. So we know, as the complexity around cancer is ever evolving, as well as that the tools and technologies that we can leverage to try and understand the patient's disease are also improving, therefore giving us much better ability to develop precision medicine and profile patients in order to define the right therapy for those patients. So this is a real high focus for the organization and very much part of the work that the early research and development groups that Gennaro mentioned earlier on are focused around. We also recognize the importance of detecting disease and treating disease early, as we all do. If we can get into identifying patients at an earlier stage of their disease, maybe when they're asymptomatic, then we have a greater chance of being able to deliver therapies that could ultimately result in cure of the patients from their disease, looking at things like more advanced imaging approaches or ctDNA and other blood-based technologies. With improved therapies, new therapies, obviously a major challenge that we encounter is the resistance to drugs. So really understanding what those resistance mechanisms are, how that disease changes over time, how it becomes more heterogeneous, and therefore the challenges of what the disease that we're presented with at the metastatic stage versus at the early stage, and really understanding how we need to tailor our therapies accordingly to overcome that. And in terms of changes in treatment, new modalities of treatment, moving hopefully from IV to oral or more convenient methods of administration with subcutaneous formulations, as well as different modalities, the more personalized therapies for patients, such as cancer vaccines and gene therapies, and also thinking about the kind of combinations that we want to try and deliver to either overcome resistance or give the best chance of optimal outcomes, and figuring out which patients really need those combinations and which ones don't. Another key underpinning focus area for the organization is really to think about how we can be more patient-centric, both in the clinical studies that we're designing, but also at that point of care, once a molecule becomes available to treat a patient, what other approaches can we develop from an organization's perspective to help evolve the delivery of that care to patients, both in terms of the treatment, but also things like telemedicine and reaching out to a broader population of patients in general. Next slide, please. So as we know, the landscape and how we treat cancer has evolved dramatically over time, with surgery being the initial mainstay, then moving on through to radiotherapy and a slightly more targeted but still quite a kind of blanket approach of chemotherapy for patients. But now in the last 30 years or so, much more of an approach for targeted therapies, and in more recent times of immunotherapy agents really becoming a mainstay of cancer treatment. And obviously Roche has quite a rich legacy in this space, all the way back to MabThera in 1997 to the more recent approvals for Tecentriq, the PD-L1 inhibitor, which was the first cancer immunotherapy for bladder cancer. But in between there, we've got the HER2 targeted agents, EGFR targeted agents, as well as the Avastin with its anti-angiogenic approach. So thinking about where Roche is moving now, next slide, please. So Roche, this was some data that was shared by Charlie Fuchs, the head of the PD Oncology Hematology Group at ASCO earlier this year. So this just gives a bit of an indication of the large scale of late stage development that there is within Roche and the PDO, the oncology organization, where there are in total 60 projects in late stage development across Roche, and 34 of these are in oncology and hematology, either as new molecular entities or as additional indications for molecules that are already on the market. So going across the board, across tumor types, both in hematology and in solid tumors. So really a large breadth of trials that are going on. And if we move to the next slide, please. And thinking about the portfolio and the platforms that we're looking to try and leverage. It goes across the board, looking from everything from small molecules all the way up to small molecules on the left-hand side, all the way up to more personalized approaches through personalized cancer vaccines and personalized T cells on the right-hand side, really using the patient's tumor itself to derive the therapy that the patients ultimately receive. But also, the role and importance of monoclonal antibodies and bispecific monoclonal antibodies as well, looking at targeting two different approaches, including the tumor and then bringing T cells to target and attack and kill the tumor cells. And monoclonal antibodies, in continued development, such as Tecentriq and tiragolumab in that immunotherapy agent, really looking to amplify the immune response to patients, to the patients, to their cancer. And another key part of the armamentarium is really the antibody drug conjugates, and rather than having naked chemotherapy being delivered to patients, really looking at how we deliver that targeted payload directly to the cancer cell, so that we have much less of the off-target toxicity associated with that. And as you can see, there's a number of assets across each of these different platforms for which we're developing approaches to treating cancer in patients that both marketed and currently in development. Next slide, please. And then just building off of understanding and helping to drive where we go to next. Obviously, one of the things that we really want to do is to continue to identify and develop transformative medicines that really do transform the outcomes of patients with cancer. And by doing this, by identifying the new targets and then developing those molecules. And again, I think this is another area where collaborations between academia and industry can be hugely beneficial, both working with academic scientists as well as our early research and development scientists in-house. Really looking at leveraging large data sets to get greater insights into disease, looking at those large data sets to then apply advanced analytics to the data to try and determine what key characteristics there are that are potentially driving a patient's tumor. Can we derive algorithms that can identify which patients are at higher risk of a worse prognosis or higher risk of developing a disease? And also thinking about a terminology that's been used a little bit internally recently of integrated solutions. And this can be anything from looking at integrated solutions that go from initial diagnosis to then identifying the optimal treatment for the patients, then how we best monitor patients through either telemedicine or digital monitoring, and then how we also monitor them from a disease progression perspective to determine what types of therapies they may need to move on to next. Excuse me. We also have some important strategic partnerships, both with Foundation Medicine for the next generation sequencing, but also Flatiron, which is the real world data platform, which again, I think gives us some really great insights into how the disease is behaving in the real world and how our therapies are really behaving in the real world, that they can help then all of this feedback into re-informing what we need to look into next in order to continue to drive improvements in cancer therapy for patients. And again, I think this is an area where generating those larger data insights from academic industry partnerships can really be something that could be helping to move the needle. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to, on the last couple of slides, just really touch on the department that I sit in and represent. So in clinical science, we ultimately are designing the clinical development plans, ultimately with obviously a goal to bring that molecule to become a licensed medicine to treat patients. But it's critical that we obviously understand the disease and the underpinning science and apply this to the trial design. We obviously then write the protocols, conduct the studies. The study comes to its analysis time point, and we're heavily involved in reviewing and interpreting the clinical meaningfulness of the data that's then produced from that clinical study, that then hopefully leads to us to developing the filing packages that go into the global submissions that hopefully then lead to an approved therapy across the globe, as well as then also looking at developing abstracts and manuscripts, presentations for scientific publications. So really a broad role. And again, I think Gennaro mentioned this earlier on, our role is very much a global role here within the clinical science group. It's not just the UK specific piece and not commercial. It's very much around the science about how we drive and advance that standard of care. And then the next slide just shows a little bit of the kind of some of the key interactions that we have both internally with the different functions that we closely interact with. And you can see that goes across multiple different functions, representing probably a little bit of the complexity as well within the pharmaceutical industry of all these different partners that we have to interact with. But we also, a massive key element of us being able to be successful in what we do is that good interaction and relationship with our investigators and our key opinion leaders, and obviously key aspects of that being from the academic world. And then finally, it was really, coming back to a point that I think Tim made at the start, is really, how we can utilize these meetings to really forge that strong collaborative partnership between Roche and UCL. Alex, Bazios and Katie as well, and Rachel will talk to you a little bit later on about some of the ways in which we can start to build those relationships through some of our fellowship programs. We have both an MD fellowship program and a PhD fellowship program, which gives people the opportunity to come in and work within the industry and get that experience, and hopefully, as Alex mentioned earlier on, to dispel some of these myths that may exist between industry and academia. But I think one of the key things from my interactions and engagements that I've had is just how important it is to build the trust between the two parties, being open and transparent and understanding the drivers and the needs from each part, so that we hopefully ultimately have a strong collaboration come through as a result of these engagements. So that is all I had to say. So thank you for your time.
Many thanks, Adam, and thanks to all the speakers. We are running slightly over. We have got a couple of questions in the Q&A, but we'll just ask one now and we'll save the others for the later Q&A sessions. So Adam, this is directed to you. Why did you always want to work in industry, and what was appealing to industry for you to grow your career in industry?
I think ultimately when I was doing my BSc and my PhD, I probably didn't necessarily know that I wanted to go into industry at that point in time. But it was through some of my interactions while doing my PhD that I got a bit more exposure to industry. To be honest, industry as well is a huge beast of an organization, so you don't necessarily know the functions that you could be going into. So I actually started in regulatory affairs before I moved into clinical science. So I think what it has shown me since joining industry is that once you come in, it, you know, the strength of the science that we do, the opportunities that we have to potentially move around departments as well, has been something that has been a key driver for me. Obviously, staying where I am, but you know, absolutely fundamental for me being able to do this was to have obtained my PhD and my postdoc experience, which, you know, gives you that great insight into both kind of parts of the world, if you like.
Great, thanks, Adam. So we'll move on to the next session, as we are running slightly over. So I'm Professor Tamarin Lashley. I'm a Professor of Neuroscience at UCL Institute of Neurology and the Director of Research at Queen Square Brain Bank. So I'm going to talk to you this morning, if I can just share my screen. 1 second. So I'm just going to talk to you this morning about the Model Consortium idea. Sorry, I'm just going back to the beginning. The Model Consortium idea that we've been discussing with Tim and Anna over many months. And this is to try and bring together the two different academic and industry research and development workspaces. So we came together with Roche to discuss how this potentially new ecosystem could be developed around a supportive network, a group of collaborations, and maybe joint ventures that would provide immense momentum for new discoveries and certainly within the translational space to provide benefit for patients. So our vision was to build the consortia around disease groups, formulating the collaborations, and these paths for collaborations will encompass all aspects of the academic levels, from PhD students to senior PIs. They can also benefit, have current opportunities that we can look for to formulate the new collaborative paths. And this would strengthen research and development as a whole, which we could include the labour mobility across the boundaries between academia and industry, and potentially the creation of intersectoral job roles and alternative funding streams for all levels. In the consortia, we envisaged senior academics in the role of advisors for those junior members of academia, supporting them in potential new ventures. Senior academics have raised possible concerns around working with industry partners, including whether there would be continued publications. However, a recent study has highlighted that academic industry partnerships actually produce highly cited papers, whereas the potential benefits for these senior PIs include opportunities to participate on advisory boards, or alternative funding streams to support their teams, and vastly extended networks within their fields, and a potential to speed up the discoveries to translation. The role of junior PIs within the consortia would be able to manage the teams to drive the projects. Much of the concerns around working with industry for the junior PIs align with those concerns with the senior PIs, but the benefits would be huge: the expansion of their networks, potential training programs, and the sort of the transferable skills that could be learnt from industry would be invaluable to these junior PIs. Having one foot in the so-called each camp in industry and academia would benefit science and potential discoveries. Postdoctoral researchers would bring technical expertise. We're all aware of the current academic system where we have postdoctoral scientists that train for 3 years, funded by one particular project grant or a fellowship, only have to have the plug pulled once the funding ends. academic institutions are then losing the skills that have been developed over those years, and moving forward with industry could provide potential training programs, secondment opportunities, as well as fellowship opportunities to retain these highly skilled scientists within the different fields. We envisage PhD students to be able to fully engage within consortia, bringing technical expertise, but also being able to benefit from those training opportunities within industry as well. Universities and industries have complementary skill sets, as we've already heard from the previous speakers, that when combined could benefit the R&D landscape and expedite translational outcomes, where both sides can contribute to research and development, as both entities offer resources that can leverage for success and mutual benefit. In academia, we have the freedom to pursue different research avenues, which can lead to new technical and knowledge developments, whereas industry, on the other hand, have predetermined pipelines and industrial scale for real-world applications. Therefore, we could see the consortia could bring these two different ways of working together for to benefit mutual translational research. And our vision for the consortia is to provide the quickest predetermined pathways for research to be undertaken. So we could support PIs and project managers to negotiate the bureaucracy between academia and industry. The differences are clearly seen in the approaches to legal policies or intellectual property in institutional research collaborations. So if a researcher is faced with these for the first time, it can be somewhat daunting or overwhelming. But if we set up a pre-existing framework that might simplify or streamline processes for both industry and academia, then research collaborations can push forward without the bureaucracy around setting all these legal entities up. Embedded within the consortium model, we would propose to hire administrative support to manage the consortia. And this would, again, streamline the drive for academia and industry to have the same outcomes for patient benefit and expediting the collaborations. So, I mean, looking back and looking at the literature, all successful industry academic collaborations seem to have three essential ingredients. And this comes from the communications between academia and industry, but it's essential to set out a program of research between the two entities, a budget, and a partnership agreement with clear goals, the expectations, and the deliverable set that both academia and industry would like to see. So this is what we've sort of set out as an ideal consortia around disease groups, say oncology or neuroscience. And now I'd like to hand over to Tim to chair this session, and we can see some of the opportunities that are already available at Roche for fellowships or training programs. So I'll hand over to Tim.
Thank you very much, Tamara. Actually, Daniel is chairing this, and I'm sort of co-chairing it. Daniel, do you want to introduce this?
Well, I mean, it's fine, Tim. You're more familiar with this, so why don't you continue?
Okay, thank you. So the next part of this meeting is really to illustrate, how careers can develop. And they can develop in obviously a number of different ways. And we're also going to talk about the suite of opportunities. So Katie Dadswell is going to start us off. So Katie, over to you. Katie, are you on mute?
I am. Thank you, Tim. Sorry about that. So hi, everyone. My name is Katie Dadswell, and I am a lead clinical scientist at Roche, working in the infectious disease department. I joined Roche back in 2019, straight out of my PhD, and not really understanding like the many roles in industry. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the varied roles and opportunities that are available in Roche. Next slide, please. So to begin with, I wanted to talk through the vast number of functions and partners that really go into driving the clinical development of a drug. And this is illustrated quite nicely in these circles here. Now, if we start with the external collaborators that Roche works with to bring a drug to the market, if we look in the center circles here, we see that we do work with health authorities, we work with key opinion leaders, we work with the NHS, and at the center of that, we really try to work with the patient as well and get them involved as much as possible. Now, if you go to the outer blue circle, there is a large number of functions within Roche that have to work together to get the drug to market, and these are the functions that we see in the outer blue circle. Most of my colleagues here that have spoken, we all come from the function at the top in the center, the clinical science. However, we have to collaborate with scientists in other areas, such as safety scientists, and these are people who really deliver knowledge on the safety profile of our medicines. We also work with scientists in the clinical operations department, and these are really involved with the operational management of our clinical trials. We also work with data scientists, and these are deliver data insights from the clinical data we collect in our clinical trials. And obviously we work with other functions such as regulatory affairs who are involved with licensing our drug, medical affairs, and others that we can see here as well. So next slide, please. And all of our staff, we really come from a very diverse academic background. We have people with BScs, MScs, MDs, PhDs, pharmacology degrees. We have a wide and diverse academic background within Roche. However, they all bring some key attributes. They all have a very inquiring and growth mindset, and they also we also work very collaboratively. And these are two things that two key attributes that we bring. Next slide, please. So now looking at what we offer you, we do have a number of what we call early career programs. So these are really for people that are earlier in their career journey. These include apprenticeships for school leavers. We have industrial placements, which happen when you are working in your undergraduate degree, where you can come and work at Roche for a year. We have graduate programs, and these are for BSc graduates, they're for master's graduates, and also PhD graduates. And these are in functions such as clinical science, data science, regulatory. These are the kind of functions that we do have graduate programs in. We also have research fellowships, and these are really for PhD graduates who are looking to continue research. We have a program which is for training doctors. So these are doctors who haven't reached consultant level, they're still registrar, and they can come into industry for a year. We'll be hearing a bit more about that later. And also we have a summer placement or a project placement opportunity, which will be like a short period where you would come into Roche to complete a project, and this could be through any part. So this could be through a master's, it could be as part of a PhD. We do offer these types of placements as well. We also have ongoing early career opportunities which are being developed and hopefully will be released soon. And you can find more information about this on our early careers page, which I have seen has just been posted in the chat. Next slide, please. So in contrast to our early career opportunities, we also have opportunities for more experienced members of staff. And these are really bespoke opportunities where we really tailor these directly with you. So some of the examples of how we've done this is through a senior fellowship. So this has been a consultant who has come in with a lot of experience in the NHS, taken a year out and joined Roche for a fixed period of time just to get insights into drug development and the world of pharmaceuticals. Another example of where this could happen could be in this permanent role and education partnership as well, or collaboration mix. So really, we are open to looking at new ways to work and collaborate with you. So if you feel there is a new way, a unique way that we can work together, we're very much open for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. That's very helpful to start us off and show a suite of opportunities, which would not be exclusive. And indeed, people may have other ideas. Some things may appeal, others may not. But I think it's, you know, these are all things that have worked for some people. And as you say, Katie, we're also open to discussing bespoke opportunities if that doesn't quite suit your needs. We're now moving on to discussing how these sorts of things have worked for particular people. And Rachel Evans is one of our lead clinical development scientists. So Rachel, over to you, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim, and hi, everyone. So my name is Rachel Evans, and I am currently a lead clinical development scientist at Roche, and I work in the neuroscience department. And today I'm going to discuss a bit about my journey, so my career journey, and moving from the lab into industry. So next slide, please. Thank you. So my journey really started at Leeds University, where I did my BSc, and my BSc was in biological science. And during my undergraduate degree, there was a talk from how to move your career and what progress you would want in your career, and specifically progressing your career into industry. And that talk was done by Eisai, which is a Japanese pharmaceutical company. And there I found this really exciting and wanted to know a bit more. And so I decided to do an industrial placement year between my second year of university and my final year of university at Eisai. And there I worked on specific drugs for Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. And while I was there, because I really enjoyed being in the lab, I spoke to my supervisor there, and I said a bit about how can I progress my career into becoming an industrial scientist, and what sort of was the career path to get there. And my supervisor at the time mentioned that a PhD would be the best next step in my career path. So I decided to actually progress into a PhD. And so I completed a PhD at UCL. So my PhD was in the UCL School of Pharmacy. And I actually completed a PhD, which was a central doctoral training program. So this is a program where you get extra training outside of your PhD. So it's sponsored by different industrial sponsorships. And it gives you the opportunity to also do 3 months in industry before you start your PhD. So I worked in the lab at Pfizer for 3 months before I started my PhD, and then progressed to do a PhD in Parkinson's disease, where I worked on stem cells. And here, working on stem cells, for anyone that's worked on stem cells for a long period of time. So I worked on induced pluripotent stem cells, developing these into dopaminergic neurons, and did this for 4 years. And in those 4 years, I decided that actually I wanted to explore kind of what is outside of the lab, and how could I take the skills that I've learned in the lab and also throughout my PhD into a different opportunity and a different career path. And that's where I decided to start looking at what other opportunities are there outside of academia, and what can I develop and use outside of academia. So here I looked at and managed to find the clinical fellowship opportunity at Roche. So I joined as a clinical fellow in October 2019. And the clinical fellowship opportunity is specifically for PhD students who have no experience in industry or no experience in clinical development at all. And it's to actually then use the fellowship opportunity over 2 years to develop you as a clinical scientist. So I thought that sounded really interesting to me because I had no experience. So I joined in 2019 in Roche, and then I became a permanent member of staff as of January this year, and became a lead clinical development scientist, where I now sit in product development neuroscience. So if we go to the next slide, please. So then I kind of wanted to talk to you a bit more about my time at Roche so far. So as Adam already kindly gave a description of what a clinical scientist is, I wanted to give you a bit of a insight into what I actually do as a clinical scientist and what I did as part of my 2-year fellowship. So as part of my fellowship, you become a clinical scientist representative in a study management team. And within neuroscience, I've worked on multiple different areas. So I've worked in neurodegeneration, neuromuscular, and neuroinflammation, working across phase 3 programs. And I've worked on study design and study startup. So I've worked on looking at providing scientific input and evaluating supporting new indications. So looking at how we can take a molecule and then support it for a new indication or a new disease area, which involves a lot of literature and literature scanning and working out how we can take that molecule and if it would be specific for a disease area and if we think it would work. And so that's then looking at the initial study design and the endpoints that we would use in that design. And I've also then been involved in a lot of document writing and document review, such as the protocol and the informed consent form, or the ICF. And I've also been involved in lots of different health authority interactions. So we interact with both the FDA, the CHMP and the PDMA in different meetings, both virtually and in person, and also in ad boards. So getting specific expert advice from academic expertise, and that all is encompassing in the study design and startup. And then I've also been involved in study conduct. So then throughout the study, and this is where we then engage with the clinical trial site personnel, and we do a lot of medical data review, and also look at protocol deviation review and assessment. I've also presented at both development team meetings, so that's internally within Roche, and also investigator meetings, so that's with our academic investigators. And I've also been involved in a lot of the clinical outcome assessments. So we have specific electronic clinical outcome assessments. So working at how we can look at different tools to actually look at this data and input this data, and looking at the compliance of this data. So how we get this data from the sites into Roche. And also throughout COVID, when it hit last year, we had a lot of difficulties within our clinical trials. So I was also part of a team that looked at how we could actually get remote assessments. So rather than the patients having to go to the site, how we could actually still conduct getting some of the assessments done, but letting the patient stay at home, and how we could actually work together with the patient to do that. So next slide, please. So then I wanted to talk a bit about from my journey from the lab to industry, how it was a very steep learning curve. So as I said, when I joined the fellowship, I had no experience of what clinical development was, and also no experience of what a clinical scientist was, or as Katie and both Adam showed, that big breadth of all of the different departments within industry. So when I first joined, this is a really steep learning curve, and it was a lot to learn and a lot to take in, both for my individual role and how I fit within the company and within the system of getting these molecules to patients. But I really wanted to highlight here that there's a lot of support within Roche. So the support is the Roche mentorship scheme, and also I have weekly one-to-ones with my managers. And I didn't join by myself. I joined with other fellows in other departments. So I was lucky enough to get the support of other fellows. And also I had a mentor both within my department and outside of my department. So that really helped then support my journey and my career throughout those 2 years. And also I just wanted to highlight that there's lots of opportunities to develop within industry, and also still work with other academics. And also I wanted to support, because my career journey came from academia and being a PhD student, I wanted to be able to support other PhD students on this journey. And there's lots of opportunities to do that within Roche. So I've been part of both a Roche bursary scheme, which is for GCSE students.
Could I just say, Rachel, sorry, we're a little bit overrunning in time here. Daniel here, I mean, we're way over schedule. I'm very sorry to interrupt you, but I think we might have to wrap up and move on. I'm very sorry to say.
That's all right, Daniel. I'll just finish up there then, saying yeah. So there's lots of opportunities to develop it, and if you have any other further questions, please add them into the chat. Thank you, Daniel.
No, thank you very much indeed. That was very interesting. We do have to a little bit hold the time because people have to go. So I think if the speakers could hold the time, we'd be very grateful. And next we have Alexander. I'm Daniel Hochhauser, oncologist at UCL. Thank you for everyone who's been here today. And next we have Alexandra Bazios, who's lead clinical director. Thank you very much. And thank you, Rachel, for that as well. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And I think my very, very short slide here is probably a good thing, so we can catch up with time. As Prof. Hochhauser just said, I'm one of the lead clinical directors at Roche within the haematology group. or franchise as we call it. And I work primarily on bispecific antibodies in non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, but I've got all sorts of other projects going on at the moment, pretty busy, so plenty to keep me out of trouble. So I'm here to give you a very quick perspective of my former clinical fellow experience, and the fact that now I am a permanent member or employee at Roche. I am now supervising and managing 2 current haematology clinical fellows as well. And I'll just very, very briefly give you an idea of the kind of work that they're involved with. I'd be very happy for you to reach out to me at any point if you wanted any further information about the clinical roles that we have at Roche. So I drafted this timeline yesterday on my birthday, which made me feel quite old. Well, I am old, but it also gave me time to reminisce that I think while we spend so much time in our careers trying to get to that ultimate place or position, whatever or wherever that is for you, actually what is most fun and what you realise retrospectively is the journey that you take to reach it. So what I would say to you is, if you are on that journey currently, enjoy it, make the most of it, go off the beaten track, discover things, because it really is all about, it's not just about where you get to. I think that's my main point there. So my career begins in 1998 when I attended, I guess, arguably, but unarguably in my mind, the best medical school in the world. I went to UCL, and I could not have wished for a better experience. I think the open-minded, inquisitive approach that was ingrained into me at that point. Sorry.
No, fine, it's fine.
Okay. That it kind of carried me through the rest of my professional career. I've made great professional and lifelong friends for UCL, so I'm obviously very grateful. Graduated in 2004, but still wasn't willing to leave Gower Street. So I carried on working at UCL for a couple of years as a house officer, and then eventually decided to go into the wider world. And 2 miles down the road, I trained for a couple of years in general medicine at Barts in London. I became a haematology trainee in 2008, and I took part in one of the academic training programs, which meant that I was able to do some laboratory work and kind of work up enough data to be able to then apply for a PhD. Which I started, I guess, in around 2011. I'm looking at epigenetic mechanisms in leukemia, specifically DNA methylation. I joined Roche as a clinical fellow, I guess, when I should have been doing a lab-based postdoc, but actually was really attracted to the advertisement of a clinical fellow. I was intrigued, very interested in clinical trials at the time, was thinking that was kind of the career path that I wanted to follow, probably in academia, but I wasn't sure. So for the first month of joining Roche as a clinical fellow, I was trying to submit my PhD. There was obviously champagne when that was completed, and then I focused for a year on the expanse of data that we had available to us at Roche. I actually carried out a few projects, all exploratory, in chronic lymphocytic leukemia and all sorts of other things. So I returned to the clinic in 2016 to complete my training, and some terrible exams called the FRC PATH exams, which some of you might be aware of. You end up with kind of scurvy and vitamin D deficiency because you really don't leave the house for a few months. But I really had decided at that point that drug development was really the path that I wanted to pursue, and that wasn't because I didn't love spending time around patients. It was actually the opposite. I developed this great interest in hemato-oncology and realised there was so much unmet medical need in many of the patients who had run out of lines of therapy, and there are some grim diseases still in hemato-oncology that, largely when patients relapse, the outcome is dismal. And so I think it was because of my frustration that there was more that could be done. I then moved into I then realised that my role moving forward would be in clinical trials and drug development. And so I made the final transition from healthcare to academia in 2018. And I say final transition, but actually I am still able to see patients every week. I hold a clinic at the Hammersmith Hospital every week, and I care for multiple myeloma patients. And I love that connection back in the clinic, but absolutely have not looked back since I've joined Roche. And very briefly, my 2 clinical fellows that I have, they're both haematology trainees, one on the south coast East of the UK. One is actually on the UCL rotation, who is also carrying out an MSc as a sideline project as well. So I am supporting two fellows, both of whom are incredibly talented. One who is focusing very much on clinical projects, and the other who is more interested in omics and NGS and the kind of I guess more biomarker driven projects, which I'm supporting both. I know that they are going to, you know, really enjoy their year. They've already got their, you know, their fingers stuck in. And if you are a clinician who is thinking about a year-long experience, as I say, to try and save time now, I recommend that I share my email, and I'd be very happy to discuss any questions that you have. Daniel, is that have I managed to catch up?
Yes, thank you very much. That was lucid and very clear, and thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
That was really very kind of you, Alexandra. I think that in the interest of time, I won't go through Charlie's biography, because you can read online, and he certainly will happily answer questions about that. And Charlie is really one of our pioneers in this area, and would like to just talk about his link with academia and industry. So Charlie, thank you very much for attending today.
Hi everyone. Swap displays.
31 slides, maybe slightly.
No, it's not that many actually.
Okay, no, that's fine.
It's 63. So thank you very much, Daniel, for inviting me to talk to you. Tim, it's nice to see you. Long time since we've caught up. For those of you who don't know, I worked with Tim. I was his registrar when he was a consultant at the Marsden before he moved to the chair in medical oncology at Cambridge. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about my experience at UCL in the context of collaborating with industry. I think UCL has been an incredible environment to be a clinical academic, and is an incredible environment to be a clinical academic. I've trained in many hospitals across London, and without a shadow of a doubt, UCLH, UCL and the combined institution really does support clinical academics and their roots through medicine in ways that no other hospital or university medical school can do. And I just want to sort of give you a sort of idea of where we've come from, what we're doing in this regard. The other good thing about UCL is it enables me to hold a position at the Francis Crick Institute, where I have half of my laboratory, the other half at UCL Cancer Institute. And my clinical work is done on the lung unit for a clinical week at UCLH. Here are my conflicts of interest. So we set up TracerX about 6 years ago, and this is an ongoing study. It's going to run for another 4 years, where we're following up about 800 patients from early diagnosis through to recurrence, relapse, and death, to understand how cancers evolve over space and time. And this is work in collaboration with Mariam Jamalhanjani, a senior lecturer at UCL and UCLH, who's co-led this program with me, a phenomenal clinician scientist. The premise behind TracerX is that spatial tumor sequencing will help us distinguish metastatic competent from incompetent subclones. And we've been running 2 studies, one in lung and one in renal cancer. And we've had multiple collaborations with industry over the last 5 years. And I'll sort of run you through some of those. And these have been enabled really through UCL's collaborative approach to industry involvement and through UCL Business and our UCL Clinical Trial Centre that have engaged with industry and negotiated all the contracts in a smooth and efficient manner. What we found in TracerX is that obviously branch tumor evolution is a force to be reckoned with. We need to understand this in order to understand drug resistance. And the drivers of cell-to-cell variation in lung cancer are principally this cytidine deaminase called ApoBec, which fuels cellular diversity. And I'm sort of telling you this partly to remind me to tell you that tumors grow like trees. You have truncal mutations present in every tumor cell, which we think are going to be optimal drug targets. And the branch mutations are the ones that essentially confound therapy response and drive resistance to treatment ultimately. And it's that diversity that presents a problem in the context of tumor sampling bias, where one biopsy doesn't represent the overall landscape of the tumor, and ultimately fuels resistance and evolutionary fitness. So about 5 years ago, I was invited to a meeting in Arizona where I met the leadership at Roche Ventana, and we started talking about how we might solve this problem of tumor sampling bias, and together came up with a plan of experiments where we would essentially use very simple mining approaches to understand tumors. And the way in which it turns out prospectors of mines understand the composition of the rocks is that they essentially blend them to understand what the underlying minerals are in a particular mine shaft. They will blend what comes out of a particular drill bit, essentially. And we decided to undertake a similar approach, borrowing lessons from mining in tumors using representative sampling, where we would take residual tumor from surgery and blend it, very straightforward, and then use that to see if we could detect clonal and subclonal mutations that are higher resolution than had ever been done before. And that's exactly what you end up doing, that blending tumors in this way, and this is a patent that Roche Ventana hold now, is a much better way of sampling tumors than just taking a single biopsy. Very simple, but no one had proven it, and our collaboration with Roche Ventana helped us do that. Now, over the last sort of 3 or 4 years, we've been thinking very carefully about how we can limit tumor evolution, and I mentioned at the beginning that targeting multiple trunk mutations we felt was likely to be a more fruitful approach, and we spun out of the Crick and UCL this company called Achilles Therapeutics to do just that, where we can find now T cells in tumors that specifically recognize truncal mutations. And we've gone through 3 series funding through A and B and C, and in April an IPO on NASDAQ. And Achilles now employs 200 people in the life sciences industry in West London, focused purely on immunological targeting of lung tumors and melanomas. And we did this because we recognized that smoking-associated lung cancer was associated with many more clonal or trunk mutations than never-smoking cancers. And so there are many more mutations in the trunks of the tumor's evolutionary tree present in every tumor cell that might be neoantigens for efficient T cell targeting. And so we spent the last sort of 5 or 6 years trying to define whether these trunk mutations are important or not. And again, access to these metadata sets of checkpoint inhibitor treated patients has required collaborations with multiple companies, including Roche, as well as Merck, BMS, AZ, and many others, where we have now compiled about 1,500 to 2,000 patients treated with checkpoint inhibitors with their exome and genome data sets. And we recently published a meta-analysis of all of the putative biomarkers associated with response to checkpoint inhibitor therapy, building on our work in 2016, where we showed that clonal neoantigens, that's the trunk mutations, are those that best predict response to tumor checkpoint inhibitor blockade therapy. So this is the approach that Kevin and James Redding and Claire Puttick took in the group, where we accessed industry and academic data sets from over 1,000 patients treated with checkpoint inhibitor blockade. We put them through a common pipeline with standardized RECIST criteria based on imaging responses, and we did a systematic review and meta-analysis of previously published biomarkers, along with a discovery analysis to find new biomarkers, and demonstrated that truncal mutational burden, so-called clonal TMB, was the optimal biomarker of response. So tumor mutational burden matters, but what matters is whether they're in the trunk or the branches. And if mutations are in the branches, the subclonal mutations do not predict response to therapy, but it's only the trunk mutations that do. So the mutations need to be in the trunk to fully predict outcome to therapy with CTLA-4 and anti-PD-1 or PD-L1 therapies. So we're now, as I mentioned, targeting multiple clonal neoantigens, and that's how Achilles has been spun out. Through multi-region sequencing, we can predict and detect neoantigen-reactive T cells that target truncal mutations and expand them, and we can give them back to patients. And we're running 2 phase 1 studies now in the UK in lung cancer and melanoma through Achilles Therapeutics. And this is a spin-out company that Sergio Casado, Carl Peggs, and Mark Laudel spun out of UCL Business, CRUK, and the Francis Crick Institute, again made possible due to the collaborative nature of UCL and our partner hospital, UCLH.
Charlie, I'm going to have to unfortunately ask you, sorry to interrupt.
Just getting to the best bit, Daniel. Just give me 1 more minute possibly, and then I promise you I'll stop. Promise you I'll stop. So lastly, I just want to tell you about the work we've been doing in the minimal residual disease setting, where we've developed what we call bespoke phylogenetic tracking tools to detect minimal residual disease in patients with early stage cancers after surgical resection in the adjuvant setting. And this is a collaboration we've had with Invitae and Natera. We've had 2 FDA breakthrough biomarkers that have been spun out of this TracerX work and collaboration. And both of these tools now are being licensed and are being used in the context of Roche and AstraZeneca trials, where we can track patient-specific trunk and branch mutations over time. And we can use this as a tool to detect impending metastatic relapse with lead times of up to 2 years now in advance of metastatic recurrence. And I just want to highlight a Roche trial that was published in Nature from our major center earlier this year, using our FDA breakthrough biomarker tool developed in TracerX in collaboration with Invitae and Natera, that showed that the Roche Genentech drug atezolizumab is active specifically in patients that are ctDNA bespoke biomarker positive, not negative. And you can and understanding which patient population that is helps to offer atezo to these patients, the anti-PD-L1 therapy, and offer them therapy to help eradicate their emergent disease after surgery for muscle invasive bladder cancer. So last but not least, we've had multiple patents licensed to industry through the TracerX pipeline and the TracerX work. We've discovered a lot of exciting new approaches, we think, to how cancers evolve over space and time, and most importantly, how tumors evade the predatory immune system. And this is just highlighting that of 11 million pounds invested in TracerX, we've catalyzed about $500 million of industry collaborations in cancer research, 2 FDA breakthrough device biomarkers, 2 clinical trials with AstraZeneca, our Darwin clinical trial program with Roche, our Ventana patent of representative tumor sampling methods, Achilles Therapeutics, a tumor microenvironment program with Rubicon, and smaller collaborations with Boehringer, Amgen, and Saga Diagnostics. Thank you very much indeed for listening.
Thank you very much, Charlie. And actually, I think that's a great example of how academia and academic knowledge can be taken all the way through to not only to clinical development, but also to fantastic pharma interactions. I mean, I think that's one of our great successes, the lung cancer unit, which is chaired by Charlie. So thank you very much for that. I think that next, Tamarin, you're going to speak on the steps forward. If I could just, there have been some suggestions, and I don't know, we can maybe leave that for the discussion. There's a couple of things in the chat and in the Q&A. But maybe first, Tamarin, we'll follow up on the steps forward. So I think that's the next.
Yep, great. Thanks, Daniel. So yeah, I'll be brief just to catch up on some time from the excellent talks. But I think it's clear from all the presentations that we've had this morning that there is obviously successful collaborations between industry and academia that we can all learn from. And I think with the momentum, obviously, there's quite a lot of people on the call today. So there is an interest. We need to keep this momentum going to benefit the translational science that we're all invested in. The next steps for this consortia are to organise face-to-face meetings, hopefully COVID permitting, around specific topics. So neuroscience and oncology will be running their own face-to-face meetings. And we want to capitalise, as I've said, on the momentum. So if you do want to be involved, have any ideas, then please do contact us, either myself or Anna or Tim from Roche's side, of how we can take these forward successfully, bringing the 2 different sectors together to forge the good research that we're all doing. So I'll open this session up for questions. If the speakers could put their cameras back on. If we do have any questions in the Q&A.
Could I just actually bring for a couple of points? One is from the Q&A, and one is from my director, Tariq Enva. So the question here is a very good one from Kevin Litchfield, who works closely with Charlie and is an independent researcher in data science and lung cancer. And he's, he asked a very reasonable question. He's a renowned cancer immunotherapy researcher. Actually develop an interaction. I mean, who is he going to go to? So that's the first question. And the second question, which I think Tariq has raised, is basically perhaps a good way forward will be, and you've mentioned different career paths people have had, maybe a good way forward is to have some kind of fellowship program between UCL and Roche that people could apply to for good projects, and they could be a review of them, and then clinical fellowships could be selected, because there's a number of areas today. So those were the two things really. Who do you go to, and could we actually make a mechanism for taking things forward? Those were the 2 points. I don't know if there's anyone from Roche who wants to address that.
Shall I make a start, Daniel? So on the first point, so like any very large institution, I think that it's most sensible to have a point of contact. So I think I would go back to what Tamarin said and say that if you have an interest such as the one that you put forward, I would contact the points of contact that will be circulated after the meeting, and I will undertake, to triage your questions, discuss them with colleagues internally in Roche, and select the person who is going to be most able to discuss this well with you and perhaps take it forward. So these are very big organizations. UCL is very big. Roche Genentech is very big. I don't think it's possible to know exactly who to go to, and it's very important to have somebody who can signpost you. So I would help do that, as I'm afraid the other people who've agreed to speak on this will probably get emails from me to help me do that. So that's the first point, Daniel.
Thanks very much. And the joint fellowship issues, which I think a lot of people have asked me about as well, apart from Tariq.
Yeah, Gennaro, do you want to start off with that one, since many of those will be neuroscience, and we will be taking a similar attitude I'm sure in oncology.
Sure, we have 3 main fellowship in Basel. One of them is also possible to do globally, even in UK. That is the one that I'm leading for medical directors. That is basically targeting at people that are already PI. So in UK, you would be at the level of senior clinical fellow or above, right? Lecturer, senior lecturer. And then in this one, the medical director one, you basically work as a medical director leading a program alongside with another one. So you're not responsible of the deliverables, but you are learning through 2 years program. And this can happen either in Basel or could be again in UK. Other opportunities are more as joint. For example, we have RISE studentship that are basically people that are in PhD in neuroscience, either basic neuroscience or clinical neuroscience. They can apply for a project that is ongoing. It could be linked to drug development, that could also be on basic science. I was replying on one of the questions on fundamental biology for neuroscience, and the person can basically even work where it is, right? It's just getting the tools from Roche. We have some of them in Germany at the moment, and I had one in Basel, but she was working out of Sheffield University. So she was basically in UK for the whole time. And then we have a postdoc program that the link are put post there, and I put the link that are basically for the one that are already with the PhD. They could join. Again, these are specific link to projects. So there is an application that people have to do that link to a specific project that needs to match the background.
So if I could just add a little to that. So I think what the question also was trying to address was a more bespoke fellowships program. And I mean, I don't want to make false promises. Are we interested in that? Yes, we absolutely are. It will require working out details and so forth, but are we interested in it? Yes, certainly. I can certainly commit to discussing that with an intention of getting something set up of the right scale and caliber. So that's as positive as I can be, and I'd be very keen to take that forward. Alex, Daniel, Alex just wanted to say something as well.
Just very quickly, so the haematology fellowship that we have in place is usually advertised in around May. The post starts in September, October. We would expect the trainee to be at least an ST3, which is a terminology that clinical trainees will be familiar with, and they would have to have approval from the deanery before they come across to us. But our program, we usually take 1 or 2 clinical fellows. It's quite well established, and this is the pattern that we've now adopted. That's just from a heme perspective.
Tamarin, you are.
Yeah, I think moving forward as well, if we're building the networks and people are coming together to discuss this, obviously centered around the different disciplines. So from my point of view, around neuroscience, by building the networks and discussing the different research projects, I can definitely see that we could potentially tailor individual fellowships around different groups within academia, which align with certain research projects within industry or Roche as well. So we could have the standard fellowships that are already available, but it doesn't mean that we can't build or forge new ways of collaborating together based around different research projects that we're all doing at present.
Thank you very much. Tariq wants to say something. He doesn't know how to hold his hand up on this, so I'll just ask him to speak.
I think it's just a direct response to Tim's point. I mean, without putting too fine a point on it, I mean, it's right and proper, obviously, that universities supply a pipeline of well-educated and useful staff to, all sectors of society, including pharma. So, it's great that there are all these programs available for our scientists and clinicians to join. But I think in the context of a real partnership, I think what we're looking for is sort of genuine collaborative projects which are de novo, initiated between UCL academics and Roche scientists, which can then be pursued in a very open and positive way, rather than just fueling a pipeline of existing fellowships, really. I don't want to sound negative, but I think Tim's suggestion that such a thing might be on offer, I think, is a direction of travel that we collectively would be very interested in and would be, I think, new and very powerful.
Well, Tariq, that's great to hear. And this was really, today's meeting is really just to break the ice, I suppose. These things need to be carefully considered, but I know there's real excitement within the company for the sort of truly collaborative projects that you've just talked about, which would have combined shared impact. And I think, I thought what Charlie said some very important things about how it's worked. He gave lots of examples of how that's worked for him. The only thing I would say is it doesn't have to have a direct, obvious clinical benefit. So it is not true to say that industry is only interested in, how will drug X work in disease Y. It is more sophisticated than that, and it becomes even more sophisticated and deeper when you have the sort of collaboration that you've talked about. So I'm absolutely in favour, and I know other people in the company are too.
Great. I think Adam Knott is wanting to speak, had his hand up. Adam.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. I guess, Tariq, it was more to your point. I think we've always been talking a lot about people coming to do fellowships at Roche potentially, and I guess my question was, would there be opportunities for people to come and spend time at CR UK, for example, for a period, to get that kind of, for people who've probably been out of the academic world for a while to go back into it and immerse themselves back into it again?
The answer is yes, actually. I think a sort of, a good collaborative relationship should have all sorts of exchanges. So yeah, the answer is yes, absolutely.
We have done that actually, and there has been interaction with a number of the biotech companies, but in general, it's often seen that this is just a mechanism for getting fellowships in the university, but it's got to be a backwards and forwards move. And actually, just one of the things, and of course, neurology, you have these shared interests for some time, Huntington's and the other storage disease and so forth. But in oncology, it's particularly synergistic what you do with us. I mean, as you know, from what Charlie has said, what Tariq has said, I mean, lung cancer, antibody drug conjugates, targeted genomic evolutionary therapies, these are the areas you're interested in. And really do feel that, as Tariq says, a dedicated program will take us forward. So I think actually, I don't know if there are any other questions. I'm looking at the question sections that people have put this before. So Tim Viney has asked a question here that it's less likely for industry to fund PhD students with academia. He's written because they're considered low skilled and higher risk. I'm not sure that that's what I have found, but studentships with part of their course in industry and case funding. Is it possible that Roche would directly fund PhDs outside the traditional case schemes? I think that's a reasonable question, although I think we may have answered that to some degree. I'm not convinced that you think academia are low skilled. I don't know, Tim, do you want to elaborate on that? I haven't really heard that before.
No, I wouldn't worry about that at all. I certainly don't think that's what we feel at all. In fact, we wouldn't have gone to this extent to create a suite of opportunities, which includes the sort of people you've just mentioned, if we believed that. So no, absolutely not. In fact, I would emphasize that we're extremely keen on helping to train people either to be great collaborators when they go back to academia, or to come and work in some form in industry. The other thing I would say is that actually industry has a different view of people development to academia, quite noticeably so. And I think that both sectors can benefit from involvement with the other. There are strengths and weaknesses to each, and I see that as an important potential advantage. If I had known what I know now about drug development, I would have had a more successful academic career, to be completely frank. And I think that if I went back to academia, I would personally be very reluctant to recruit people, particularly into phase one, who did not have any industry experience. And indeed, in the University of Edinburgh for several years, via Duncan Jodrell, who's professor of phase one medicine there in oncology, had a scheme with AstraZeneca, which has produced a number of very successful phase one doctors who spent a year in industry. And incidentally, they've all gone back to academia. So it is simply not true that we're not interested in the more junior end of the spectrum. So I would really want to reassure you on that.
Thank you very much. And just following on from that, because I think Ariana Gatt has put a very important point, because the obviously our currency is often publications, and the question is as she has asked, is if my postdoc contract finishes within a year, let's end, is there a risk of not getting publications because of IP issues? And I think the IP issue is one that's sometimes concerns a lot of researchers. That they won't be able to take them an inordinate length of time to get a paper approved. I mean, do you have a policy on that? You did mention it, Tamarin mentioned it, and so did Professor Wild in the beginning. Ed Watts mentioned that in the beginning. So I would be grateful for what you think.
I don't know if others want to speak as well. If I start, and then I see that Gennaro and Alex both have their hands up. I mean, one thing I would actually point out is that one of the metrics in various large companies is are you publishing in highly rated journals? So there is it's not as significant a push to publish as it is in academia. That is true. But is there encouragement and indeed need to publish? Absolutely, there is. It would be glib and wrong of me to say, disingenuous perhaps of me to say, that there is never a problem. But that would be very specific to individual programs. So that there can be problems. I think that what Tamarin was saying in your talk, Tamarin, about covering some of these items with overall agreements is does mitigate the problem. It doesn't abolish the problem, but it does mitigate it. And I think that's the most realistic thing I can say.
Number of people who are wanting to speak. Anna and Ed, Alexandra, and Gennaro.
I just want to say something about at least data that we have available on publications that come from collaborative works between industry and academia. So for instance, Nature Index shows that almost 90% of the articles that corporate institution authors that are done in collaboration between researchers and academics are amongst the most cited. Also, there was a report from Elsevier saying that output of academic industry collaborations is more highly cited. So I think this just shows that there's definitely a drive for both sectors to work and publish together. Yeah, that's all I wanted to add.
Thank you very much. We move on. Ed, and then Alex.
Thanks. I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but certainly my experience has been that there's something about the way that you define the relationship in a collaboration of this kind that makes it clear you have to be clear from the outset what people's expectations are. I mean, I think the reality is that if one partner is paying the entire cost of a research collaboration, then that partner can reasonably expect to have control over the intellectual property or most of it. And nonetheless, I think an academic partner in a situation like that can assert the importance of such outputs and can expect to be able to stipulate reasonable timeframes for publication and what to do if there's disagreement about the timeframe for the publication. But in my experience, there hasn't been that much of a delay. Industry needs to get things published one way or another in order to get public acceptance of the drugs that they are eventually trying to sell and the evidence behind them. And when there has been a delay, it's usually been one that has produced a better output at the end of it because of a need to fold it into a broader trial program or something like that. But I do appreciate that whether it's an industry partnership or not, there will be situations when someone's personal sort of contract or life deadlines won't be compatible with getting the research out in a format where it's most helpful. But there are ways to accelerate the process with preprints and so on. It is an issue, but I think it's one that can be addressed if there's agreement and a shared sort of direction early on.
Thank you very much, Alex.
So just so this was practical. So the scenario that's described was something that I've experienced, and actually the clinical fellow who has now gone back to the clinic also experienced, which is that we had generated, so as a clinical fellow, I generated data. I'd started to, compose the basis for what would become a paper, but then my year was up and I had to go back to the clinic. And so a contract was set up, which allowed me to be able to continue to collaborate with the group that I was working with in order to get the paper complete and submitted. So and actually the last clinical fellows just had a paper in Blood as well with exactly the same thing. We had a contract set up. He continued to collaborate. The paper was accepted. And I think the other thing to say about the impression that journals have, actually incorrectly, I have to say, coming from the pharma side, that is that very often first and last authors are not encouraged to be those that have come from pharma. If you have this, a large consortia of people that have taken part in a study. So actually, it is a symbiotic relationship. We do need clinical scientists to and clinicians to be first and last authors. So we do go out of our way to make this work for the individual, because of course any data that is generated with our data is great. Is good for us. So it definitely. There are definitely ways of getting around this, be rest assured.
Thank you very much, Alex. And then Gennaro and John, thank you.
I can share from the experience I had moving from academia. Actually, in neuroscience, we are testing new molecules, right? New mode of action, new disease, if it's the case for genetic and rare disease. So there are different collaboration. In some cases, is mostly driven by academics, in which they also lead the publication, the output. In other cases, actually the majority, for my department at least, we are leading in development, right? So basically we are publishing. So I'm personally publishing the data that I'm working on. But there are other cases, and more you go early, let's say on the research side, is I think likely that would be internal, because most of the research is done at Roche. More you go as a more advanced stage, it is what I've seen, at least with colleagues, there are more involvement for external, and then more work is done. So first and last author, right? In this case, in my case, are usually both Roche side, but would be an internal and an external. But it's definitely very important for our development, for the people joining Roche or working in this joint position, that they continue to publish, because they might decide to stay in academia, right? One of my fellow that went back to UCSF in US, she's publishing now a paper that she did at Roche, right? The team here say, okay, you need to have, even if she left the company after a year. So this is the normal for us. It's really important to publish actually the clinical trial. We have a policy in neuroscience to develop. After the CSR, the clinical study report is submitted, within 12 months, we need to publish. And even if it's negative or even if it's mixed results, we need to really show to the community. What we actually did for other programs like Renezuma, as soon as we know the negative data, if it's negative, we go public, because we want the community to know, right? This is also another important aspect. So there is no worry, at least for now, that join pharma, you will have less. Of course, you have less time to develop science, so you will have probably less papers, because you cannot spend all the time to do that, right?
Thank you very much. John, you want to, John Pazzi?
Sorry, I got myself on mute. Sorry, thanks, Daniel. Yeah, my comment really has been largely picked up by people that have spoken before me. But just to summarise, I think that publications are really important to both the academic world and industry on a number of levels. It's about getting the information out there. It's about recognising collaboration. It's about actually doing the right thing for people and patients and academic information and learning. So it's just as important, and people will work constructively with each other to maximise the publication opportunities. So I would just reiterate largely what everybody's said to date. Publications are really important, and they're important on both sides of the fence.
Thank you very much indeed. I mean, I think that's really covered that. So I think we don't need to be too concerned about restrictions on that. And I think that's the end of this session. Just to say, in relation to Ed Wild's trial, very fantastic account in I think the Observer or Guardian this weekend with Charlotte Raven about the human side of this trial, which I think is an astonishingly interesting article for those who want to know.
Thank you.
How this
it was the Times, but thank you.
Oh, the Times, sorry, Sunday Times, sorry. Thank you. Thank you very much to all of the people who answered the questions. And I think we could move on now to the next section, which I think is going to be really Anna and John, who's going to talk about dispelling the myths about industry, some of which we've already dispelled.
Yeah, thank you very much, Daniel. So yes, so Anna and I are going to sort of have a free-flowing discussion with everybody that's been part of the meeting today. So we're going to start off with a question that's come up in the chat from Bart van Hesselbroek. I really apologise, I probably pronounced the name wrong. That's one of my failings. I'm awful at pronouncing people's surnames, so apologies for that. But Bart said that he found this a very interesting session, but the meeting has to date largely focused on clinical work, not so much basic research. In his own work, he found that the AZ open collaboration to be very interesting for basic research. So the question to Roche side is essentially, does Roche have similar plans to work around early targets and biology? So Tim, Gennaro, would you like to throw an answer in?
Yeah, I'm happy to start, John, if that's all right, Gennaro. So just realize that Roche and Genentech is a global organization. So although it's very nice that we're within a few, less than half an hour on the railway line, we will actually work with whoever's best in the world. Happily, a lot of those people are at UCL. So I would say that there is interest, perhaps within the consortium model that Tamarin laid out earlier, that it's just a question of connecting you with the right people who may or may not be in this country. So early development could develop further in this country, but it may well be that for discovery science and early development, which is the area that, that's the jargon terms we use for what you've asked, may not be in the UK. It is quite likely to be in Switzerland, Germany, or the US. We'd be very keen to build it up further in the UK. One way of doing that would be to show the strengths that we have here. So, there are a number of reasons that I would be very keen to put you in touch with the right people. The only problem, and I'm not sure it's a problem at all, is that they may not be UK based themselves.
Gennaro, have you got any thoughts or?
Yes, we have many collaboration, as Tim was saying, and we have many possibility. I share two of the RISE student and the postdoc, right, for people that want to have around. But we really work across the biology of these neurodegenerative diseases and other diseases. So if there are ideas, we can, have one point of contact we said for today, and then we will share with the right people. I'm happy to introduce to the right people in research, because the research has research and early development. I'm sitting in early development, but I can introduce to the colleagues that work from lysosomal biology to neuroinflammation and all the other important components for neuroscience. We really want to find the cure, right, for this disease. So to do that, we need to go after the biology with the academics.
Yeah, and to pick up on that, I think the biology is a very broad topic. It's not all about finding a molecule or a disease target. It can be about understanding the disease. It can be about developing biomarkers, as we heard before. That's just as important for a drug development process and bringing new medicines to patients. So basic science is important. We don't need to be blinkered by the view that it is all about targeting a pathway, developing a molecule. It can be much broader than that. So I think, yes, clearly basic research is critical to what the pharmaceutical industry needs to do.
John, if I can share one aspect of my personal journey, right? I was trying to repurpose many drugs, right? As an academic working in clinics, right? And at Roche, the beauty is that once we find out the model, as you said, the biomarker, we need to first develop that, probably also in an academic setting. Then we can test several different scaffolds. We have one of the biggest library available for small molecule. And then this allows to design the drug around the disease that we want to target. So we don't need to have another drug that is used for another disease, right? This is one of the advantages, but takes a lot of time and a lot of collaborations.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to throw out a question to those on the UCL side here. Anybody can answer. What do you think are the biggest myths that exist about the pharmaceutical industry?
I'm not sure that this is a biggest myth, but I think one of the concerns we have in academia often is is a potential for parasitic relationship in which some of our top people get sort of interaction and then they get fantastic offers. We cannot match the salaries that are given in pharma, and we've got the potential to lose leading academics to pharma without the partnership coming on. That certainly is a problem of all universities, and maybe it's an insoluble issue, but I think that is a problem. How we keep a partnership going that doesn't result in this sort of attrition of academics to industry. Maybe that's inevitable, but that's to me one. I don't know if it's a myth, but that's what does happen.
Okay. So, Anna, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, we've been thinking a lot about this and how we could, improve conditions to assure retainment on both sides. And I think some of the ideas that me and Tamarin have been championed is the creation of hybrid roles of people that could work in both sectors simultaneously. And I think there's examples in the US where this has worked successfully. So I think this is something that we could consider. Because again, as we've seen, there would be advantages for pharma to access expertise and knowledge and the way things are done in academia, and the same can be said on the other way around. And for certain fields, there's just not enough experts. Let's say there's not enough AI experts, there's not enough data science experts to populate both sectors. So a solution would be to have positions that will allow people to work in both sectors, which I think it's a little bit what Tim has, for instance.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tamarin, you've got your hand up as well.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the myths which has just been sort of debunked listening to everybody talk this morning is around publications. So if you're solely based in academia, for any promotional aspects, or we're sort of judged on our publication record quite heavily for the academic framework. So it's good to hear that, you know, publications are still a priority for industry, which I think would reassure postdoctoral level scientists that even if they dip their toes with industry on various projects, that they can still move forward and work on their publications for their own promotional prospects within academia. So I think that was good to hear.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, it clearly is something that's shared. And just sort of a personal perspective, picking up on Daniel's point, I can see that people feel that there may be a parasitic relationship and people are drawn out, but equally there can be lots of reasons why it's right to stay in academic medicine, and moving into industry isn't the right thing to do for you as an individual. What is important is engendering that collaborative spirit so that we can work together. So I've obviously only relatively recently moved into industry and saw no reason to do it for years upon years upon years. But a collaborative spirit where you can do things jointly and push forward things for patients at some point may be fair and reasonable for individuals to do. But it's breaking these myths that it's all about money. I think is really important. One thing I've learned personally in my short time in industry is that there is a genuine desire to follow the science, learn and develop things for patients. And that in clinical science particularly, this is about as far as you can get from commercialism. I certainly had personal myths that have been busted about industry, thinking it was all about taking data, spinning it and selling it to sell drugs. Clinical science, which is what we're focused on a lot today, whether you're a clinical scientist, PhD or a medic, it's not about that aspect of the industry. Today, we're talking about the real science. So I'm hogging all the question asking. Anna? Oh, Tariq, sorry, before I hand over to Anna, Tariq, you've got your hands up.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to your question really, and this is more about concerns rather than myths, I guess, is that one is sort of dilution of academic focus, and that happens in a number of settings, not just a commercial one, where people start to go down a track and slowly move away. It's mission creep, I guess, in a way. You know, move away from what the institute really wants to do, and we still have to support them in that context. And the second one really is when confidentiality things start to sort of affect the interaction between academic colleagues in open discussions and seminars, where suddenly people can't show stuff or don't want to talk to somebody else and all of that. And again, you know, these are concerns we often have, but they do need to be managed, and they can be a little bit toxic sometimes when we have the us versus them with an institution, those who are collaborating with industry and those who are not, right? And again, that's a cultural thing that we need to manage, work on and explain.
But it's potentially got solutions by understanding across the board. So Anna, I'm going to give you a chance to throw out a few questions rather than me hogging the whole thing.
I think had something to say as well. He has his hand up.
Oh, I can't see that.
Thanks, Anna. I was just wanting really to echo John's point about this, the realization that there isn't anything fundamentally different about the personal motivations and approaches of the people involved in these two different sectors. And certainly for me as an academic, entering industry buildings and spaces, there is something different about the environment. The coffee's much nicer, for instance, but once you get into those rooms, the discussions are science-led, passionate discussions among people who care about discovery and human endeavor and doing the right thing to make the world a better place. That sounds very sappy, I know, but it was a surprise to me the extent to which the the people involved are no less sort of personally connected with the work and celebrating the triumphs and commiserating disappointments. And in many cases, that's because those people have worked in both sectors, at former academics in industry and vice versa, and in many cases, multiple transitions across that boundary. So I think that's probably, just to really echo what you said, John, but also sort of that for me, that personally was a bit of a myth. The idea that things would be fundamentally different in some way, in some sort of mystical way, but they really aren't.
Yeah, and just to pick up another point, there are transitions back and forth. I mean, the obvious transition is from academic medicine into industry, but you can come back the other way, and that's not unknown. In fact, the best example of that is probably Jonathan Van Tam, who we've all heard about and seen buckets on the TV. So he moved into industry and then moved back into academic medicine. So it is about fluidity, it's about understanding, it's about that will to collaborate with one another, and a real wish and deep wish to do that. Sorry, Anna, I'm just hogging everything. I'll hand it back to you genuinely. Here you go.
Don't worry. I have here a question from an early career researcher that I think they're trying to find some advice on how to navigate their career. So for instance, if they're finishing their PhD and they would have an interest in pursuing a postdoc in a cross-collaborative space, what would be the best approach to try to combine both from the start, or to go first into academia and then try to either suggest their lab manager or someone to work in this collaboration? So for some people working in industry, what would be your advice? Alex?
So I actually think that there are a number of, I can think of a number of examples where it can be either or. I can think of a clinical scientist that came across in the rheumatology arena, identified some very interesting data, and while she spent her time with us, then went back to, at that point, a clinician to find out whether there would be any opportunity for her to base her PhD around the data that she had kind of come across on the Roche side. And actually that was set up it's a really great example of, I guess you would almost imagine it happening the other way, but it can happen both ways. I think the more conventional route would be that you would start your PhD, you develop some curiosity around the industry, the maybe the targeted side or the medicinal side, come across to pharma towards the end of your PhD, but it can happen both ways. We're completely flexible.
Thank you. Adam?
Yeah, and I think just adding on to what Alex has said, it doesn't necessarily have to be an all or nothing one way or the other. I think we mentioned earlier on, there's a number of different opportunities that people can take advantage of to either come for a few weeks, a couple of months, something like that, to get exposure and experience and figure out which route they want to go down. As Katie and Rachel will testify to from the clinical scientist fellowship program, that's one thing within clinical science, but there are similar types of programs that are in other parts of the organization, such as biostats and regulatory and those kind of areas, that people can get exposure to the different parts. And even if people come and want to get a bit of exposure to industry just to see how it's all comprised, we can make it work, that people can come in for a couple of weeks and we give them as much exposure to the different departments within the organization, if that's something that's of interest. So again, I don't think it has to be you jumping ship from your academic career. I think you can have a hybrid approach.
Thank you. Tim?
I think that's a very important point that Adam's just made. I just want to emphasize one thing, which is that although pharmaceutical medicine is a very highly regulated field, the way we educate people or give people experiences is not regulated. So we can be much more flexible than an educational institution can, actually. So that's a benefit which I would be very keen to make available to UCL. I'm not saying anything goes. Some things may or may not be possible, but nothing is out of the question from the beginning because we have the freedom or the lack of regulation rather, which gives us that freedom.
Thank you. Rachel?
Yeah, and I just wanted to highlight that I think for me, key here in understanding what you do and don't want in your career is just asking these questions, attending events like this, going to more events, making a network of conversations that you can have both in academia and in industry, and just keep asking questions to actually then kind of, I guess, find what that career path could be, whether it is in industry or in academia. Those key questions and key discussions are really, I think, really important.
Yeah, I do think sometimes questions emerge from the fact that when we are in academia, it's very difficult to have a complete, like a holistic overview of what are our career options. And that's why I think these events and like talking with people that have done this transition, that are navigating both spaces, it's really, really important. To follow up on that, I would like to ask, maybe we can ask Ed and Tariq. I wish someone had told me this when I was getting started. What did you wish you knew before you got started?
I have to say, I had such good support from my mentor, Sarah Tabrizi, that I've been extremely well supported on my journey through research, academic research, and through the collaborations with industry. And she's been someone from whom I learned the lesson of letting down rope ladders to the people that come next, and not instead of pulling up the drawbridge. And I think that's so important to make sure that you're constantly paving a path of the people that follow you, because otherwise, these sort of missions that we're on will take, realistically, will take longer than any of us have on this earth. And so we really just need to make sure that we create a sort of sustainable relationships and pathways for the people that follow us. So find a mentor that you really can rely on, and who will open up those sorts of opportunities for you, and then do the same for the people that follow you.
Yeah, from my perspective, I wish someone had told me it was so badly paid. I think I might have done something different. The other thing is, it's a very unique perspective actually, but I've never had a career plan. I've just always done what I found interesting at the time. And I think mentors and advice and career structures and all this stuff, it's very good for some people, and the modern world is more complex to navigate. But really, you should just do what something that you want to get up in the morning to do, and the rest sort of falls into place actually. So I think people agonize about this rather too much.
John?
Yeah, hi. So I think that's really important point that Tariq makes, having a mentor, and that Ed mentioned as well. It's so important to careers. Even if you haven't got a pathway laid out, having somebody that you can speak to and bounce ideas off is absolutely critical. And you certainly do get that within the industry setting. People are not going to be allowed to flounder. So I just got a question before we're going to be wrapping up, just before the top of the hour, to our UCL colleagues. Assuming you do want to go down a collaborative route with industry, what do you find the biggest roadblocks? What are the impediments in making it happen? Or flip it around the other way, what would you do differently to make it easier? Daniel.
I think we've focused a lot actually on the potential obstacles. I mean, my view is actually that it's actually not that difficult to do these things. I mean, UCL is very much in favor of these collaborations. I think, yes, there are holdups of bureaucracy, but I don't actually think it's a major issue. I mean, I don't wish to sound Panglossian, but actually, if the will is there and the projects are there, we have never had an issue. And, Charlie has already told you about some of the companies he set up. I really don't think there are major issues, at least not on the oncology standpoint. So I would not focus too much on obstruction. I think there's a will to make it work.
I mean, that's really good, because that's the whole mindset of will do, can do. Ed, you were going to say something.
Yeah, same sort of thing really, in that there is a sort of perception, and you do hear horror stories about how long it took to accomplish a simple thing within the sort of academic framework, trying to make something commercial happen. And no doubt that is an issue. I think the universities are much better than they used to be at putting mechanisms in place to allow for pragmatism and for wheels to be oiled in that respect. And certainly the one time I've had a substantial hold up due to one part of the machine not turning particularly efficiently and not being pragmatic, the UCL Translational Research Office was incredibly helpful at unsticking that. And so I think it's a case of sort of knowing who can help and who has the sort of power to, perhaps step back and help other people to adopt a pragmatic approach to make things, the cogs mesh a bit better.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it sounds like having an institution that's got a pluralistic view on how it's going to work with different parts of the healthcare and academic research setup is what's absolutely critical. Okay, so thank you very much, everybody, for those questions. I'm just going to hand over now to Tariq, Selina, and Tim to 5 minutes just to bring this session together, and just say thanks to Anna for co-chairing this Q&A with me. So, Tim, Selina, and Tariq, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much. I'm unmuted, so I will go first. It's a real pleasure to give some concluding remarks on behalf of the Institute of Neurology, where I'm the Deputy Director for Partnerships. I first of all would like to thank the organisers and all of the speakers for the fantastic talks and discussion, and also for being so open and honest in sharing what their experiences have been like. Our mission as an institute is really to do research for patient benefit. So we want to do useful research that has a positive impact on people's lives. And partnerships are really key to that aim. We can do this most effectively if we collaborate. And we've seen today from the examples that were presented how successful this can be, but also how fulfilling it can be and how it can enrich people's experience from both sides of the partnership. So I think it's been really great today to start the discussions about how we can expand this and to hear about what opportunities exist. I've been really excited to hear some common myths dispelled, but also the range of opportunities that are available, particularly for early career researchers, and that it doesn't always need to be led by these senior PIs. I think this is a really exciting development. And so, of course, today is kind of the first conversation of what will be a process. I'm really excited to see how this develops. And, as an institute, we want to be as supportive as possible and do as much as we can to enable successful long-term partnerships that will be mutually beneficial, both for us from the academic sector and also for our industry partners too. So thanks to everyone, and thanks particularly to the audience as well for their kind of contributions in the Q&A, because it's also important for us that this process is steered by what the community would like. And yeah, I'm excited to see where this conversation goes in the future. So thank you all for participating in this first event.
Tim, shall I go next and let you conclude? Yes. Well, I won't repeat many of the excellent points that Selina's already made. I just focus on two things, really. One, that I think actually I'm very heartened to see there's a range of different models and approaches, and that people could engage with each other in a number of different interesting ways. So I think the richness of those possibilities is very exciting. More specifically around oncology, I was very heartened actually to see Adam's presentation spelling out the areas of interest from Roche, right? And I thought there was tremendous opportunity and alignment with UCL's own agenda there. So I think there's a lot of perhaps more detailed follow-up conversations that could happen in those spaces to see then what projects, what opportunities could we really take forward. So I think it's been a great day. I'd be very excited and interesting to follow up more specifically.
Great, thank you, Tariq. So I just want to add my thanks particularly actually to Anna and Tamarin and Daniel for actually a long period of work getting this together, as well as to a really terrific panel of speakers. And also thank you very much to the audience for providing questions, providing your thoughts and worries and hopes before the meeting, and also participating now. I think this has been extremely successful from my point of view. I think that it's encouraged me, to have a word with my colleagues in various parts of the world to say what we're up to. And I would like to emphasize that actually, I don't think anything is off the table. That although we've presented a suite of opportunities you've heard about, I also got the impression that maybe there were modifications of that could be useful for colleagues at UCL, and I'd be really, really keen to explore that further. So after the meeting, Anna, I think it's fallen to you actually that we'll be providing our points of contact, so that you will know who to contact, as I hope you will be interested in taking these conversations forward. And I look forward to future meetings, whether they're large meetings like this or possibly more bespoke focused meetings to discuss individual projects, which would be great. I really want to build momentum. I think that will be important. I think it'll be important to get something started as well. So it doesn't necessarily have to start in perfect form. I think we should explore and start piecemeal before we build into a really significant collaboration, which I really hope we can construct for the future. So thank you all very much for participating, and I've enjoyed it very much. I hope you have too, and I'll bid you all good afternoon. Thanks very much.
Yeah, just to finish, I just want to say that I will follow up with an email with the contact details, and also we are recording this session, so we'll make the recording shortly available as well. And I just posted a poll asking people if they were interested in a follow-up event, and 100% said yes. So that's very good. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.